we are here. Yes, that was very important. So we are recording. Today we are here to just launch research, and it's part of the reasons why we exist, which is to ensure there's robust evidence that is ready to be available for the sector, for policymakers, and for girls, so that we can act when we're working with and for them. The other reason is to ensure that adolescent girls are prioritized whenever decisions about their lives are made, especially by government ministries and donors, and then to ensure that we add to capacity requirements within different sectors, including the public, private, and the civil society. So as we go on to giving a background, we are launching this research, important research, in partnership with GAGE. And that is something that is very special to us. They're one of our members, and they work specifically in building evidence. And what we have today is research that examines funding gaps, trends, and priorities, and provides insights for adolescent girls and how they align with sustainable development goals. The new research that we have today builds on AGIP and GAGE's past two publications, and it incorporates the most recent financing data, that is from 2022, from the OECD Credit Reporting System database. By adding financial data as it is published, this series traces the patterns and trends in the global funding landscape for adolescent girls. The studies underscore, like this is the series that we've had on this, underscore the vital importance of prioritizing adolescent girls in development initiatives and highlight the transformative outcomes of sustained investment in their well-being, education, and economic development. So at this point, I'll just ask that Pooja, you can kindly just share in the chat the past research that we have in case you're interested in looking into that in detail, because we're not going to go too much into that. Today, we're going to focus on this research, which is very timely because we all know kind of the developments that we have in the world right now. And we're also approaching Beijing plus 30, as well as approaching also as well as the 2030 SDG deadline. So adolescent girls still face unprecedented funding and policy changes, perhaps right now a little bit more even exacerbated. So this research is important as it highlights funding shifts and emphasizes the importance of investing in adolescent girls' well-being and leadership. Now, at this point, I know we were having some tech issues earlier, and we're going to move into the next section. I wanted to introduce Joy Zawadi. Joy, are you there? Were you able to log in?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, Maloa.
Hello, Joy. So nice to have you. So as we embark on this dynamic conversation around strategies and partnerships that effectively resource adolescent girls and take into account the current changing and challenging funding context, we look forward to hearing all your thoughts. And it is my pleasure to start us off by introducing Ms. Joy Zawadi, Akili Dada Executive Director and AGIP Co-Chair, to share her opening remarks. Joy has spent over 10 years advocating for the rights of women and girls, working to dismantle structural and cultural barriers that hold them back. She's a dedicated resource activist who excelled in mobilizing resources, amplifying the voices of girls and women, and challenging societal stereotypes. So Joy, welcome. Please share, let us know. What do you think? Because I think we're all interested in, I know Little One Sylvia is going to give us a bit of the research, but there's just a bit of maybe anxiety, questions about what's happening right now. What are you able to share with us on this? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maloa. And I just want to say thank you to all of you colleagues, partners, and advocates who have joined us in this conversation. And just to also extend a warm welcome from the AGIP team as you join us for this conversation. So just to give you a bit of context, I know a lot of us are currently dealing with a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of questions because basically the donor landscape and the landscape for gender work has really changed, right? I think the world is facing an unprecedented times. Because everywhere we look around, there's a lot of concerning trends as far as funding cuts are concerned. And I know the research will delve into this, but as recently as I think a week ago, we've had a policy brief, let me say, from the Dutch government explaining the funding cuts and their reprioritization, for example. We have seen policy rollbacks, not just on the African continent, but globally. And again, every one of us here is probably what's top of mind is what's happening, for example, with the US government. And there's a rising tide in anti-gender rhetoric globally. And one of the things that we definitely know is that the anti-rights and anti-gender movement is organizing, is strategizing. And one of the shocking things that for me personally, I learned is that they have a 40-year outlook in terms of their strategy, in terms of how they want to go about creating roadblocks or clawing back on the work that we have made. And so these are the times we're living in, and it can be quite daunting for most of us. And yet this is a time where we really need to allow the challenges to strengthen our resolve, and also to just fuel us to do a lot more work and to work a lot more strategically. And so when I was thinking about the opening remarks, there are three things that came to mind. One is, how do we adapt to our new reality? Two, how do we build sector resilience? And three, how do we counter the anti-gender narratives? How do we adapt to the new reality? And particularly for this conversation, because we're talking about how the funding cuts and the policy changes will impact our work, is we need to think innovatively and we need to think resiliently. We need to ask ourselves, what alternative sources of funding do we need to look into? For ourselves as Akilidada and as a Global South-based and a Kenyan-based organization, some of the questions we've been asking ourselves, for example, is, can we tap into local fundraising? Can we tap into local corporates? Can we tap into individual donors who resonate with our work to support our funding? Can we also look at how can we monetize the work that we do, whether it's offering consultancies, combining both traditional and private sector support and partnerships, and more importantly, community-based resources. I think a lot of us really overlook what is available within the communities. And for context, some of the young women and girls that we actually work with have taught us that there are resources in the community that we can tap into. And so adapting to a new reality for me looks like really thinking outside the box of who our partners can be, who can we collaborate with that probably traditionally we have not reached out to, and how can we connect to them and help them to see and really resonate with the work that we do. On the policy front, it's really helping. In fact, I've just come from a meeting this afternoon where we were talking about a lot of times we really focus on the opposition and we forget the general public. How do we get the general public to see, to understand that funding girls, funding adolescent girls is important, helping them to understand the unique challenges that they face, and how they can contribute to change, to undoing those challenges, for lack of a better word. And the other thing is about resilience, right? The strength of our movement will lie in communities. And I really want to encourage all of us to really tap into community in this time and in this the season that we are in. And I think AGIP is one of those communities that we can really tap into, is to think about how can we support each other? How can we particularly amplify girls and young women's voices, and ensure that their lived experience is actually taken into account when people are making our decision making. The research that will be spoken into shows that when we invest in girl-led initiatives and support their leadership development, the impact extends far beyond the individuals who are direct beneficiaries of this work. And so how can we really elevate that and amplify that so that those who are not directly involved in the work can begin to see the ripple effect and the benefits of investing in adolescents? The last thing I'll speak to is about countering anti-gender narratives. I think we cannot look at the funding conversation outside of the issue of countering the opposition. And I think this is actually our greatest challenge, right now. It's about making sure that we amplify the evidence, right? So that it's indisputable. It's about amplifying the storytelling. So can we make sure that even the changes that we begin to see, the impact that we are seeing reverberates beyond our movement, reverberates beyond our circles, so that we're not necessarily speaking to ourselves. And even for those who will be participating, for example, in CSW, is how can we frame our advocacy? How can we frame our communications in a way that really resonates with people, so that they don't just see it as a political issue, but they see it as a fundamental driver of economic and social development. Because the data is clear. Investing in adolescent girls and young women and youth yields returns across all development indicators, from health to education to economic growth to climate resilience. And so we need to make sure that we really amplify that and make sure that people hear and actually appreciate that when we invest in girls, we are investing in our collective future. And so with all of that, my call to action to all of us today, even as we delve into this research, is to think beyond our traditional approaches, whether it's to advocacy, whether it's to resource mobilization, whether it's to communication, and really think about how do we build stronger community around ourselves? How do we ensure that girls' voices remains at the center of our work? And how do we amplify the evidence so that we really do make the case for people to continue to invest in adolescent girls? Because I really do believe that if we're able to do that, then we'll be able to build more resilient and more thriving communities. And with that, I will hand it back over to Maloa for the rest of the session.
Thank you so much, Joy. That was absolutely powerful as always. I feel like hitting the streets, and just doing something about everything that we have. I just picked something up and it just connects to what we're saying, which is the data is clear. We need to invest in adolescent girls. It yields returns. And so what are we going to do? And I think one of the things before we get into the discussion phase, because we're going to have that later on, is I'm going to just invite Sylvia. Now, Sylvia is a wonderful, she's a focal point for GAGE, and GAGE is a member of AGIP. So we do get to interact with her very brilliant mind quite a bit here at AGIP. And she's an experienced researcher and strategic advocate for adolescent girls and youth. She conducts evidence generation, policy engagement, and research update coordination at GAGE. That is the Gender and Adolescent Global Evidence Program. So they are partnered with us to put out this very important piece of research. They are the technical minds behind this. And she specializes in gender, adolescent displacement, and mixed methods and evaluation research. If that sounds like a lot, it's because it's very, 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 very important work, and it's amazing. So I'm just going to give her this opportunity to make a presentation and share the findings of the research. So Sylvia, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maloa and Joy, and to fellow panelists, and of course to all our attendees today joining this session. Can I have the next slide, please, Maloa? Thank you. So we're very eager to present our findings from the Investing in Adolescent Girls series, because as has been mentioned, this is the third series, the third report in a series. So we're really able to tell a story and to see how trends on bilateral donors funding adolescent girls has changed through time. Next slide, please. So today I'll provide a little bit of context to why we feel this research and having a trend analysis is important. I'll then spotlight other sort of work streams within the AGIP and GAGE research series. I will speak about the methodology we've adopted over time, and then look at some of the key findings. Hopefully, we will also be able to link you to the full breadth of findings in the report that we've just published on this. And then I will conclude with some key recommendations for policymakers and for the field more generally. Next, please. Right. So we know that efficient and effective allocation of funding for programs supporting adolescent girls is critical for progress towards achieving the SDGs and beyond. And we know, and certainly this is not the audience I have to convince, I don't think, that investments in girls in adolescence, because of the very specific and critical time window that is the ages of 10 to 19, investments across domains can yield greater results in the near and long term. And as has been already mentioned, not just for adolescent girls themselves, but for their future children and for communities and nations altogether. At the same time, and perhaps the initial sort of spark of this research, is that we noted within GAGE and within the coalition, the AGIP coalition, that historically how funding flows and how official development assistance is trickling down to adolescent girls has not been very transparent. And there has really been a historic opacity to how funds are allocated, to which domains, to which SDG domains, and also to which girls in their diversity. And so this has also hindered insights into efficacy and also hindered sort of advancements in really evidence-based advocacy. So this report builds on 2 previous rounds of GAGE and AGIP investigations into how funding has mapped onto adolescent girls' outcomes, as well as adolescent girl-led initiatives. So the first iteration of this report spanned the years 2016 to 2020. And then we included a 2021 update to see and really monitor the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So to meet the AGIP vision, which Maloa eloquently laid out at the start of this webinar, the collaboration between GAGE and AGIP really aims to bridge the gap between what commitments are made on a global scale into actually advancing the rights of adolescent girls, and then the resources dispersed to sort of buttress those global commitments. We have, throughout our collaboration, acknowledged the changing context of the adolescent girl agenda. So as Joy mentioned, the recent rollback on rights and funding, but also we've noted over time increased action, momentum towards adolescent girls' needs and adolescent girl-led efforts. So together and in wider partnership within the coalition, we aim, our role as GAGE is to generate and share evidence on what works for and with adolescent girls, and to galvanize collective action and collective discussion, which I hope will follow on from my presentation today. Next slide, please. So a word on the methodology we adopted for this series. So we initially reviewed data from the OECD credit reporting system, which is the largest global database on donors' official development assistance. What we then did is we selected the top 10 bilateral gender equality donors and extrapolated and explored data for those top 10 donors across low and middle income country contexts. And some might see this, and we've been told that this is a quite generous analysis, in that we selected official development assistance, ODA, with gender equality as both principal and significant objective of projects and programs that are funded. And I'll get into this distinction a little bit later on. And we then used and really hand-selected and hand-picked keyword searches for adolescent age groups, adolescent and youth age bands, as well as intersectional domains to identify targeted funding that is flowing to adolescent girls in their diversity. Next slide, please. So what did we find in this latest iteration and over time? You can hopefully see the bar charts on your screens. So overall, the story seems positive in 2022 in that we found a substantial increase in the total amount in real terms of gender and adolescent tagged ODA in 2022. So this amount increased from $7.7 billion US in 2021, as you'll see from the screens, to $8.57 billion US in 2022. And whilst this, and also I might add, this latest increase is substantially more than the increase from 2020 to 2021. So whilst this seems a positive story, this upward trend must really be viewed with caution by looking at the purple line on the screens, which shows how the percentage of ODA flowing to adolescent girls as a reflection of overall ODA in those years. So we see that actually funding for adolescent girls is a deprioritized sort of domain from 5.5% in 2021, going down to 4.76% in 2022. So this is really a quite troubling indication that ODA targeting gender and adolescence is seeing a deprioritization in relation to other target population receiving larger percentages of that funding. Findings by age category. So our investigation also focused and disaggregated based on the age ranges. And a note to say that the lack of disaggregation in the database, in the OECD database, makes outcomes by adolescent age quite difficult to discern and quite difficult to analyze. So many times we see loose categories that you can see on your screen, such as older children, unspecified age ranges, and girls as a category in general. And we have made this, we have also noted this in previous reporting exercises. However, taken together, we can see that the amount flowing to adolescent girl youth has increased owing to the general trend towards increased funding to adolescent girls, and specifically adolescents, so funding tagged as for adolescent girls, increased as well as for the youth age bands as well. Next slide, please. When looking at and disaggregating the official development assistance by gender principle tagging, which relates to the advancement of gender equality as the primary objective of programs and projects and activities being funded, as opposed to gender significant tagging, which refers to programs and projects expected to make a significant contribution to gender equality, whilst gender equality might not be the primary objective of that funding. We see that ODA with gender principle tagging has decreased over time as a percentage of overall budgeting. So again, this is quite a troubling indication that projects that really signpost and have as a core outcome of gender equality have decreased since we have been doing this trend analysis, going down to close to the range identified in 2016. So it's on a downward spiral. Next slide, please. We further are able to show our findings by donor, sector, channel of delivery, and recipients. And we can see that the donor landscape has remained broadly consistent from 2021 to 2022, with the top 3 donor countries being Canada, Germany, and France in that order over time. Each of these 3 countries, noteworthy, have increased spending levels for this for adolescent girl cohorts. We also note that in 2022, the US eclipsed US institutions as the fourth highest contributor, reminding that this is data, the last published data from 2022. jumping from 0.74 billion to 0.94 billion, while the EU institutions' contributions shrank. Also noteworthy is the UK continuing its precipitous drop, having gone to 1.32 billion in 2020 to 0.9 billion in 2021, down to 0.7 billion in 2022, which is evidence, of course, of a longer scale trend in the UK's budgetary allocation. Whilst Canada, Germany, and France, of course, are the top bilateral gender equality donor for adolescents, we still note that ODA remains a small portion of donors' total development assistance, never surpassing 2.4%. And this is particularly troubling because in many countries, in many low and middle income countries, as we know, adolescent populations are approximately 20 to 30% of total country populations. Interestingly, we are able to map how ODA commitments to adolescent girls overlap to the SDG agenda. And there are some sort of shifts we can see and perhaps can take a moment to discuss later. Because data available from 2020-22 provides key insights into how donor commitments are translating to specific SDG domains. So the greatest increase, this is not on your screen, but definitely you can find the full table in the report. The greatest increase in funding by far was in areas related to SDG 16, so peace, justice, and strong institutions, particularly conflict, peace, and security in refugees and donor countries, received a 74% increase from 2021. However, this goal only saw, whilst it saw the greatest increase overall, it is still the second to last SDG domain receiving this amount of funding. The SDG domains receiving the most funding for girls are you can see this on your screens, are SDG 1, poverty alleviation, SDG 3, health, SDG 4, education, and SDG 5. And the pie charts demonstrate how from 2020 to 2022, these 4 domains have remained consistent over time. That being said, there are some interesting trends to note. Sorry, Malo, I'll spend one more second on this slide. While SDGs 1, 5, and 3 all increased funding over time, SDG 4 remains the most highly funded goal, but it saw a significant decrease in funding over time, from 51% in 2020 down to 38% in 2022. Next slide, please. Recipient countries also see quite dramatic shifts over time. So we see prioritization changing. Jordan's, we highlight just some key findings. Jordan's funding dropped from $304 million to $144 million between 2021 and 2022, whilst Turkey, Bangladesh, and Ethiopia, historically very large sort of countries receiving gender and adolescent tagged funding, were replaced in 2022 by Indonesia, Tanzania, and Lebanon. Again, by a very wide margin, multilateral organizations, NGOs, CSOs, and public sector institutions were the primary recipients of gender and adolescent tagged ODA. Next slide, please. We show here a gender and intersectionality disaggregation and analysis. So whilst the WHO estimates that 1 in 6 people globally have a significant physical or developmental disability, which accounts to approximately 16% of the world's population, we don't see the amount going to adolescent girls with disability nearly as high as this would warrant. The amount of gender and adolescent targeted ODA reaching young people with disabilities, in fact, is quite small, although we saw a tremendous jump between 2021 to 2022, which you can see from your screens there. Funding for youth-led organizations we see is incredibly minimal, which will possibly not be a surprise to many of you in attendance today. Funding for youth-led organization is approximately 1.1% of all gender and adolescent tag ODA. So whilst we know it will be crucial to amplify girl and youth-led efforts at the community level, bilateral, this is again the top 10 gender equality bilateral donors are not trickling in this way. And if we see the next slide, this was a sort of sister report that GAGE conducted in partnership with AGIP, which was a qualitative mapping study to try and understand resourcing and impact of girl and youth-led organizations. And we know that girls and youth face many, many barriers when trying to access bilateral funding. Primarily, we heard that they often don't have sufficient due diligence processes to meet the requirements of large international and institutional and bilateral donors. Also, whilst many girl and youth-led organizations are formally registered, others are unable or unwilling to do so due to many multitude of reasons, including high cost barriers, as well as legal age requirements, and also the risks in making their work visible, so preferring to operate under the radar in the communities they work in. Also, and hopefully this is the report disseminated today, is a step towards bridging this gap, but we know that limited donor transparency makes it difficult for girls and youth to understand what funds are available, how to access these funds, and if there are thematic, geographic, or other parameters that would be noteworthy for them to bear in mind. And also funding, as we know, is often for specific short-term projects with very limited flexible and core funds to support staffing or organizational growth of many youth and girl endeavors. Next slide. So as aforementioned, this is the third report in the series, so we feel well placed because of the longitudinal and trend analysis that we were able to commit to with looking at investments into adolescent girls to make a few key recommendations. The first is to garner support and promote advocacy around the development of an adolescent-specific marker, so within the OECD credit reporting system database. As mentioned, we really had to select and read through the database to understand which funds were committed to adolescent girls. So an adolescent-specific marker would facilitate not just research, but also making commitments more accountable. Secondly, we would seek to work with donors to increase funding that targets adolescents with disabilities, as well as supporting other intersecting needs, which we've looked at in previous iterations of this report, including those of migrants, refugees, and child brides. We seek to monitor gender and adolescent ODA for youth-led organizations, including that core support, so that they can develop capacities to access a broader set of funding channels. So whilst it is critical to continue monitoring ODA that is flowing to programs that support adolescent girls, we also seek to support girl and youth-led efforts. Seeking to prioritize public sector channels and public-private partnerships for a more comprehensive approach to assisting young people. And finally, continue to invest in research to monitor gender and adolescent-specific commitments and investments, to increase donor accountability, which is a prime mission of AGIP, as well as explore a wider pool of emerging donors. So whilst this analysis looked at bilateral donors, we understand and we are well aware that there are many other important donors and players and partners of adolescent girls that would be worth including in such analysis. Thank you very much and look forward to the rest of the discussions today.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. That was really amazing and insightful, although, it's still a lot to think about. I think as Joy had mentioned in the beginning, because it seems like given that this is data from 2022, some things have not only changed, they've gotten a little bit worse. One statistic that struck out to me was on youth-led organizations. Only 1.1% of gender and adolescent-focused ODA reached youth-led organizations. Of course, Sylvia, you've been very helpful to share what barriers are there. And I think there's no better moment for that because right now I'm going to introduce Marcy Jemitai. They are a young speaker, a young leader, youth leader, intersectional speaker, and who believes in Ubuntu. She is a feminist and she also believes in human rights and inclusivity. She is passionate about organizational development and has a background in grants making and administration. Jess is very young, so when we were doing this prep, it was really amazing to look at the insights and the information she had. So I'm going to just be inviting her next to share reflections. She has experience and passion for creating impactful, inclusive, and safe experiences for convenings and providing operational support. In her work, currently she works with the Association for Women's Rights in Development, AWED. So they are a strong believer in the spirit of Ubuntu, the idea that I am because we are, and just listening to the recommendations that came out of the research and also the sentiments that we had initially, I think it would be very nice to have to hear from Jem. Jem, are you still on? I know are you still on? If you are, just let me know.
Yes, I am very much on. I am here. Thank you, Maloa.
Thank you,
It's
Jem.
very interesting to just like look at the research, and I think it's very true that we need to invest in adolescent girls. And I say this as someone who has been supported through my education. I was part of Akili Dada's Young Changemakers program back in the day, and I think I attribute my success and progress just because Akili Dada invested in me. And it's very important. And my passion and sort of my call to action is really for funders to start thinking about supporting organizations who are working with young women and girls to just ensure that people have general and flexible support. Because I mean, organizations do need to invest and have endowment funds just in case we see shifts in governments the way we are seeing right now, where a lot of governments are shifting their priorities. And we are also seeing governments are also are shifting to far right wing, where I mean, rights really don't care to them. But I think it's important that we start advocating for flexible and general support funds for organizations, especially organizations that are investing and working with adolescent and young girls. Because I do feel like when we invest in adolescent and young girls is when we have sort of a multiplier effect, because when you invest in one girl, it's just not one girl. It's a community, it's a family that then benefits from that investment. And that's how we build a resilient and strong social economic justice for communities and countries in large. And that's how we build a world that's equitable. So I do appreciate the research, and I really call for general and flexible support for organizations, because it's very important, even as we develop our strategies on how to be much more sustainable in terms of funding. Yeah, thanks, Maloa.
Thank you so much, Jem. And I think there's something that you had shared earlier when we're having our chat, but from your first-hand experience, what do you think, what type of investments would you think are most crucial for adolescent girls and youth-led organizations?
I think for me, because as a lived reality, Joy spoke about lived realities. As someone, and as I had mentioned, as someone who has been supported through education, I have majorly relied on scholarships for my education. It's therefore important to invest in education for young women and girls, because not only do you go to learn in school, but you also go to like network and just like learn from different people. That's how you learn about what's happening in the world, what's important. So education is definitely a key anchor to just navigating the world and networking, and also health and well-being is very important. I remember at the time, because a lot of these issues are intersectional. You'll find that someone who comes from an underserved background possibly has needs to be supported with their well-being. They possibly need to see a psychologist, and they also need, for example, their school fees to be paid, and they also need to be supported with, say, menstrual support through, say, provision of sanitary towels, or even provision of education around SRHR. So it's very intersectional, and I think just investing holistically in adolescent girls is very important, because then a lot of things are intertwined and very intersectional.
Thank you so much for that, Jem. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. And I will keep that up for some questions in the follow-up section. I would now just like us to move on to the next part of this conversation. We already are all agreed that investing in girls is crucial. We're thinking of the different ways in which this could work based on our experiences. And with that, I think this is tying in very, very nicely. We now have Haishin Park. She's an economist and gender program coordinator at the OECD Development Center. Ms. Park leads the gender program addressing gender inequality through evidence-based analysis. And I think that's really nice, because you're seeing the tie between evidence and how we make decisions across the board, and strategic policy dialogue. She drives initiatives that uncover the root causes of gender disparities, fostering global discussions to advance global gender equality and women's empowerment. Now, hi, Shin, how are you today? Hope you are doing well. Welcome, welcome. I just have a question for you, and you could just let us know. So what shifts do you expect in official development assistance, that's ODA, funding for girls initiatives, in the coming years? And this could be based on your experience or what we've learned today from the presentation by Sylvia.
Thanks, Melo. I hope you can hear me well. Perfect. I think we've already seen the research that was presented, but we also know that the landscape is indeed changing. The whole global financing, the development financing landscape is undergoing really rapid shifts, as you all know, presenting both challenges, but I also want to highlight that there could be some opportunities for advancing adolescent girls' rights. So as you mentioned, on one hand, several high-income countries have reduced their official development assistance, the ODA. Obviously, it diminishes critical funding for gender equality initiatives. We all know that US has frozen a significant portion of its budget, and it's not the only country in the past couple of years. And this does create uncertainty for development programs worldwide. On the other end, I also want to bring up other type of sources, for instance, private philanthropy. We at the OECD Development Center, we have a Center for Philanthropy that also tracks private giving. And I'd like to say that private philanthropy is playing an increasingly important role. OECD data also show that philanthropic funding for gender equality has grown between 2017 and 2021, both within donor countries and across borders. But obviously, here's the reality. Philanthropy alone cannot close the gap. It remains still a very small fraction of total development funding compared to the ODA. And most of it still remains quite gender blind, meaning it often misses the root causes of inequality. Funding is also highly concentrated among a few major donors and focused on specific areas like sexual and reproductive health and rights. While SRHR is critical, this leaves huge gaps in areas like girls' education, economic empowerment, and shifting harmful social norms, which I hope to be able to discuss a little bit further. At the same time, we all know that the political backlash and pushback is growing, with some donor governments scaling back their commitment to gender equality, making the funding landscape even more unpredictable. So the bottom line that I wanted to also make today is that if we are really serious about creating lasting change for adolescent girls in all their diversity, we must prioritize better targeted, most strategic funding mechanisms that tackle both systemic discrimination and emerging risks. So some of the areas that I just wanted to quickly mention to break those barriers, funding obviously must go beyond short-term project-based solutions and focus on long-term structural change. We at the OECD, we believe that data is really the key, especially investing in data to track social norms and close the gap between laws and reality. Even when girls' rights, for instance, legal rights, exist on paper, there are social norms that they really hold them back. So more investment in gender norms data can help anticipate backlash and drive smarter policies. And secondly, we also need to fund programs that challenges such norms, not just provide services. For instance, education, healthcare, and protection must go hand in hand with shifting social attitudes. Investment should support community-led efforts because they know firsthand, especially when it comes to challenging gender roles. And also I want to mention that we need to fund programs that actively engage men and boys as allies, not as an opponent. Those rising anti-gender backlash highlights the need to proactively engage men and boys in advancing gender equality. Investing in positive masculinities, for instance, can really prevent backlash, build broad-based societal support, and create sustainable gender equality gains. And as you've already mentioned, we also need to really think about providing long-term flexible funding for local organizations. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shane, for that. That was very amazing, concise. Of course, I will recognize that you do work with data, and something that you talked about that has struck me is we need to engage men and boys, and we also need to look at structural changes in the sector. So do you think there's any way that philanthropic organizations should evolve to better support, adolescent girls' needs and development, especially with everything that you've shared and what has been shared as well in the research?
Yes, so I want to talk a little bit about from our research, especially from the flagship database that we have that's called Social Institutions and Gender Index, what we call SDGs. And also our recent work on SRHR on sexual and reproductive health and rights. Just to sort of pinpoint where do we actually need most urgent financing needs. So the SDGs, especially the 2023 global report, has shown that while we've made progress, it's just far too slow. For instance, child marriage rates have dropped from 1 in 4 back in 2010 to 1 in 5 in 2022. But at this rate, still the full eradication of child marriage will take generations. Also, intimate partner violence is declining, but still millions of girls are still experiencing abuse daily. More concerningly, deep-seated barriers persist, particularly at the household and community levels. The family still remains the primary space of discrimination, from unequal inheritance laws to unequal tasks at the domestic level, and also to restrictions on adolescent girls' autonomy. Harmful social norms continue to dictate gender roles, limiting girls' access to education, economic resources, and also reproductive health and health services. And like I said, backlash and regression are real risks, and we all feel it. And Sikidata has already warned it because there has been biases against women's economic rights, but also educational rights that have been worsening in the past 10 years, which highlights again the fragility of gender equality gains that we've seen in further past decades. So if we really want to have a lasting change, funding definitely must go beyond laws and service delivery. It also must tackle the root causes of gender inequality, which is embedded in power structures, social norms, and systemic discriminations.
Thank you so much for that, Haishin. Thank you so much. I'll let you go there and have a bit of a break. I invite you to continue. For all those in the audience participants, thank you for your questions. They're very helpful. Please keep putting them in the chat. Just after we've had our next panelist, Ms. Deirdre O'Shea, we're going to take your questions. So please keep on sharing them. So Deirdre is part of Peace Sisters. She's a board member, and Peace Sisters is a valuable member of AGIP. It is a girls' education and empowerment organization, and based in northern Togo. Deirdre is a fundraising consultant, and she brings over 20 years of nonprofit experience, specifically in fundraising for social change and values-based fundraising. She's passionate about the intersection of human rights, art, and youth empowerment. So with everything that we are hearing about and talking about having lasting change, ensuring that funding goes where it's needed, not being superficial, but addressing root causes, as Haishi has shared, then we are now going to have Deirdre kindly letting us know what she thinks, because we now know beyond a reasonable doubt what the data shows, and it shows that we need to invest in girls and adolescent girls. That is clear, but that does not translate into adequate and transparent funding. So Deirdre, I wanted to ask, as you introduce yourself and welcome, at a time of declining respect for facts, how can we best use evidence to advocate for adolescent girls? Welcome. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to start by saying that thanks to AGIP and to GAGE for doing this research and bringing your analysis together so beautifully and taking this time to share it with us today. So the question about declining respect for facts and how we can best use evidence to advocate for adolescent girls, I would say use your evidence ferociously. Sustain your participation in AGIP and organizations like GAGE who are invested in research, and engage in your own research if your organization has that capacity, or partner with organizations and institutions that do. Research is how we understand our communities and refine our programs. It's how we evaluate our impacts. It's how we make hard decisions. But in our advocacy, it's our foundation. And I guarantee we will be challenged. We are being challenged, and we will be fighting misinformation, bigotry, sexism, lies, all of it. But when we're grounded in quality research and evidence, we have clarity and we bring authority. We need to understand our evidence. For example, today we learned investment in adolescent girls has increased by $850 million, which sounds impressive and sounds quite promising. But we learned that as a percent of the official development assistance, funding for girls decreased from 5.5% in 2021 to 4.8% in 2022. So paired with what we know through research and data, investment in adolescent girls, it supports the development goals, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And so we know that collective investment in girls is sliding back at exactly the time we should be striding forward. 2030 is so near. We know the answer: invest in women and girls. We have the data to prove why. And it's vital that we know our data, know our sources, and be able to articulate the stories of our organizations and our agendas with data, with the details that tell us how and why. Facts are the backbone for all of our narratives. Narrative must include the voices of impacted girls. But when our stories are paired with research, we dig into particular examples and then give specific context, which is moving. But the data allows us to step back and lift up to the macro and show how this example is a part of a larger national or global context. So for advocacy, we need to center the stories of girls, especially in our advocacy work, but when it's paired with evidence sets, and we understand the evidence that we're using to engage imagination and empathy, we can also engage critical thinking and demonstrate our authority. Research gives us opportunities to be in coalition, even with non-obvious partners. We in AGIP can see how our agenda intersects broadly with the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. One opportunity here is to show how AGIP goals align with the global development community. We broaden our audience and we increase opportunities to work in coalition when we advance our agenda. We can find other points of intersection between those that center girls and the global development community. There are a lot of opportunities in this space. And for finally, how we can best use evidence to advocate for adolescent girls at a time of declining respect for facts, I would say cede no ground to those who oppose facts. We will be challenged in a world that seems less concerned with facts, or in a world with bad actors actively engaged in misinformation. But we will understand and articulate the evidence to cut through that opacity. We will need research and data and analysis for our own clarity of purpose. And we can pull the gravitational center of discourse back towards replicable research and irrefutable facts when we do it. So I hope we can be fearless in gathering our evidence, engaging in research, and going where it leads us, and just as fearless in how we use it for our advocacy.
Thank you so much. That was really amazing. And I think one thing that struck me is seize no ground. That's very important. Also, in the coalitions and the way we work together with other organizations, which turns it also ties to what Joy had shared in the beginning about allyship, about working together. And I think also comes into the issue of storytelling that you've just shared. Now, this is going to be a quick fire question that I'm going to pose to you, and any other panelist is able to share into this. So in 2 weeks, we know we have CSW 69 coming up, the Commission on the Status of Women. There are a lot of different views on that, and I think just in terms of how we can use data and use what resources we have most efficiently, our work within 4Girls. What do you think we can do to elevate this discussion and ensure that they make an impact and get to girls and young women, a lot of whom are not able to be in these spaces? What can we do? This is just something that perhaps Deirdre, you can share, and any other panelist who is able can also share their thoughts on this.
Well, I don't have much to say that's new, so I'll just repeat what we've learned over and over and over. When we seek to strengthen sanitation health systems, health generally, the answers are grounded in investing in girls. For social advancements, conflict resolution, invest in girls. Combating hunger and alleviating poverty, start with girls' investments. When we talk about climate change, environmental issues, the answer is grounded in investing in girls. Rule of law and rights for all begins with equitable investments, and that means investing in the rights and dignity of girls in all their diversity. So we have the ample evidence to demonstrate why. We know the answer. And when we walk into coalition spaces, just remember that and be grounded in your authority and in the research that you so beautifully have shared with us today, and all of your other research that underpins your work.
Thank you so much for that. Haishin, would you like to share on that question as well?
Thanks, Maloa. I can only echo what was already been said. I think it's a difficult time, as we all know, so it's all the more we need to be strategic, and especially at the CSW, where maybe we can really, make some allies, get some alliances to amplify the messages. So I think also it's very important that we reframe all of these issues that we're talking about to be an economic investment, not just a gender issue, so that we can fund girls, that we say that funding girls boosts GDP, workforce growth, and also social stability, and so on. And obviously, secondly, we really need to integrate it into key policy areas. I think Deirdre was also saying some of the same messages, integrating or mainstreaming this into key policy areas like climate finance, digital inclusion, in migration, and so on. I think where gender-based funding faces less resistance, I think this is where we can also get more funding and benefit adolescent girls. And finally, we really must use hard data and financial tracking to hold donors accountable as well. And on this point, we say that I want to commit that in the OECD, we are committed to produce hard data with the SIGI update in a couple of years as well, and obviously also tracking both ODA but also philanthropic giving to ensure commitments to translate into real impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So we're just getting into another lovely section of this whole conversation. We're almost done, and thank you so much for your wonderful engagement throughout this conversation. I see there's some questions in the chat, and we're going to get into a Q&A session. You can also just raise your hand, or you can pop your question in the chat. And I believe we already have the first one here for that Sylvia might be able to assist us with. And I believe it was concerning about the recipients. We'll assume you're talking about the recipients of the ODA funding. You can clarify if you would like to about the recipients. Any difference between actors mentioned? That seemed like a very long list. I will look for the next question as perhaps Sylvia gets ready to work on that. Somebody else has asked, where can we get the AGIP research? We have those on our website, and Pooja has very graciously shared those links there, so you can look into that. And we are having this conversation, and we'll continue to have it as well on social media. We are using the hashtag Girls on the Agenda. We are on X and Instagram as well. This video will be uploaded on YouTube, yes, so you can get to follow that alongside our report and see what the findings are as well. So as we wait for any more questions, Pooja, please let me know if there are any hands up. We also have, yes, we're waiting for updates from the Netherlands and New York on funding. I don't know if Sylvia, you're ready to take the first question, and then we could see any other questions that come up.
Sure, thank you. And firstly, thank you for the engagement, and to all the speakers again for really insightful commentary and engagement with some of the research findings. And if in terms of recipients, we talked about recipient sort of countries. We talked about recipient SDG domains, and yes, the changing nature of sort of country focuses, as well as looking at some key intersectional domains. So we highlighted disability today in the research presentation, but we've also further looked at how much funding for girls is going to the prevention of child marriage and to adolescent migrants and refugees as well in previous iterations. And I think the really interesting thing and the emphasis on data, as has been hopefully highlighted in the research presentation, but also with some of the very powerful reflections, is we want to see how these commitments also translate to global moments. So for example, we saw we've seen historically an increase in funding to adolescent girls with disabilities following the Disability Summit a few years back, whilst that level of investment plateaued in the following year. Likewise, following the first Global Refugee Forum, we saw more funding allocated to refugee, IDP, and IDPs, migrants, and kind of stateless populations, and seeing if those investment commitments are maintained over time is really critical to be advocating for those populations. So hopefully this trend analysis will continue, but also echoing Hei-Shin's point, I think we do need to bring a broader philanthropic organizations, intermediary funds that we know are investing a lot of resources into funding girls and youth-led movements and groups, for example, and other players into this analysis as they kind of gain more traction, become more important, and see how they are basically putting their money where commitments are too.
Thank you so much for that, Sylvia. I'll move on to the next question, and I just ask that you continue to either have them post your questions in the chat, or you can send them to us directly, one of the Secretariat members. So the next question is, based on the findings in this research, how can youth-led or girl-led organizations, that is younger ones, access funding, ODA funding, multi-year funding, because it's already a problem? What are the lessons that CSOs have learned, and how can we utilize them in accessing funding? So if any of the panelists are ready, you can take this question. Otherwise, I will look on to the next one or select. Perhaps Sylvia, from what you shared in the recommendations, if you have something to input to that, you could as well. But then any other member of the panel is welcome to answer that question as well.
Yes, thank you for the question, and it's a fundamentally challenging one to answer, I will say. And again, from this piece of research here, we see that a very small percentage of ODA is flowing to youth-led organizations. And then in a previous study that was published in 2024, a GAGE research study in partnership with the coalition, we note that resourcing girls directly are the funding mechanisms are certainly out there, and there is literature to support the fact that there are organizations working to fund girls movements and girls organizing. How that is kind of compiled into one compendium or documentation accessibility issues is still something very tricky. And I think the field is still navigating with rendering those funding opportunities more available, more open. Some organizations have completely sort of opened funding applications and rendered processes very accessible. Others are on the road to doing that. Others have sort of internal challenges with doing such funding so openly and so innovatively. So there is a breadth and wealth of ways to do it. How it's compiled is difficult, and again, I think this is a challenge in the field. But maybe Pooja, we can also link to the report on resourcing girls directly, which includes certainly some of our findings to this question, and also the relying on broader literature that speaks to resourcing girls holistically and accessing funds. But I'll let other panelists also intervene.
Thank you so much for that, Sylvia. We're doing well in time. We have 10 more minutes. So just in case any other panelist wants to add on to that, because the next question is also kind of, tied, but it was how CSOs, especially grassroots organizations, can also adapt to the funding landscape. And I wanted to know, I was just curious, do any of the panelists have any questions, either for each other or on the research, or perhaps any lessons before we move on to the next stage of our discussion? So perhaps I'll give you maybe 30 seconds to let us know if you do have a question, a comment on what we have heard today, or anybody as well from the audience is welcome to either put it in the chat. I see that Pooja is working very well. We have a lovely list here of the research from AGIP, and she has just linked in as well the research that Sylvia mentioned. So kindly do take that up, and in our report we'll also have all those links so that you can benefit and we can grow together from this knowledge. So is there anyone from the panel with any other questions? Okay, if not, Olivia, we are here, all of us, AGIP Secretariat, working together. We will move on to the next slide in the next session of this. And I will be welcoming Kathleen. Kathleen is the co-chair of AGIP and the Chief Strategy Engagement Officer at Plant International. She has over 20 years of experience in advocacy community, and she brings in a wealth of expertise and leadership, and is passionate about advancing gender equality, women's health, and girls' empowerment. She's also an advisor to the World Economic Forum's Health Initiative. I'm inviting her today here to help us close, to round up, and perhaps to answer some of the tough questions, like where are we going to get funding? So Kathleen, welcome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Maloa. It's such a formal introduction. I see all my friends on this call. So great to see my fellow co-chair, Joy. Thank you so much for opening. And again, just thank you to GAGE. Again, we have such a wonderful partnership, and again, that their research is always so timely and important. Again, thanks to the Secretariat, Pooja and Olivia and Maloa, and some wonderful interventions from Deirdre and Haishan and Mercy. Thank you just so much. There's so much going on in the world, and having these spaces together with you really kind of make that make this all much easier, much better. So thank you again for all just being in support and solidarity with each other. But I don't think I have the answers, Maloa, but just to say, I think my goal is to kind of summarize where we are and just a few final calls to action. The first is, I think we can all take away just the investment in girls and adolescent girls is so essential and critical. And I hope that as you move onward to CSW or other influencing spaces, that we all collectively are reinforcing the critical role of sustained funding for adolescent girls in the areas of education and leadership and economic empowerment. There's a number of key takeaways from this report. And again, I hope you'll use the summary of the report findings, and that they'll be shared again in the chat in your upcoming advocacy, just to highlight the progress, but also the challenges and donor commitments, and calling for greater transparency and accountability. And I think, Deirdre, your points were just, again, I wrote them down and I just reinforced them also. Just, it's so important to be grounded in fact, in data, and evidence, and to be able to use that front and center to remind ourselves that we have made tremendous progress together, and we need to hold that line. And that means making sure that we are articulating what works and what that impact is. And so the key takeaways from this report are really, really valuable. Now, the last piece, Maloa, you asked me, is just sort of what's next. And so I think there's two pieces. So the first is, I hope everyone here is aware of AGIP's Accountability Champions platform. And that I really just want to encourage all of you to, if you don't know, to learn more about the Champions platform via AGIP's website. You can register your interest to attend our upcoming event at CSW on March 14th at 3:30 Eastern. There's a link here in the chat, and we'd love for you to be able to help us with a mapping exercise in advance of CSW. So I hope you will see us there together. Again, it's so important that we bring member states into this conversation. The tent needs to be bigger, and this Champions platform is one way that we're in solidarity to help us get there. And just lastly, just my final call to action to all of you is just to really, again, to continue this conversation. Please amplify these research findings and continue to push, as I know you always do, for meaningful investment in adolescent girls. So I will see you, and Joy will see you online as we continue this conversation using the hashtag Girls on the Agenda and in our social media platform. So again, just so much love and hugs to our AGIP Secretariat, and to thank you, GAGE, for this partnership and this research. I think with that, we'll close. Maloa, back over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Kathleen. Thank you to all our wonderful speakers. This has been an amazing discussion. There are already the links there in the chat box. So please do connect, and let's carry on the conversation. We're going to be connecting this piece of research to other research that we're launching together with ICRW, another member of AGIP at CSW 69. So continue having the conversation. Please do send us questions. We're still always going to answer them. And on your screen now, you should be able to see the link to download the research, read it for yourself, share, have conversations, and let's keep it going. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Have a lovely evening. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Bye.
See you at CSW.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you.